Both Canada and the United States have now accused the Indian government of assassination plots targeting foreign nationals. What do we know about these accusations, and what could these very public allegations mean for India moving forward? I am Shannon Tiazzi, editor-in-chief at The Diplomat magazine, and I'm happy today to be discussing these issues with Siddharthya Roy, who is a New Delhi-based correspondent who has reported extensively on security and terrorism issues in South Asia, including for The Diplomat, among many other outlets. Sid, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So on November 29th, U.S. prosecutors unsealed an indictment that accused an unnamed Indian government employee of attempting to arrange the assassination of a U.S. national who also happened to be a Sikh separatist leader based in New York City. This follows the allegations from Canada that the Indian government may have been involved in the assassination of a Canadian national Sikh separatist leader back in June. So, Sid, with all of this context, the very public spat that's been playing out between India and Canada, how big a deal is the new U.S. indictment?
It's an absolute game changer, primarily because you will recall that when Canada made the accusations against India, India hit back saying, show me the evidence. Show us where you got your info from. And the Canadian government didn't really put anything out. But the Americans have done that. The indictment is very much a public document. Anybody around the world can see it, and they have named names in it. And it's gone into quite some detail. So essentially, the American response is far stronger than the Canadian one was. The allegations are closer to concrete at the moment. Closer, I say. I wouldn't say it's an absolutely concrete allegation, and it is still an allegation. There's the second part, of course, is that India and the US is a very different equation as opposed to India and Canada. India can't simply negate that which the Americans say. It can't just wish it away. In fact, you'll note the response, the language of response from the Indian government is significantly different. The response from the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs is far muted, and they have promised to carry out a high-level investigation at their end. This is completely antithetical, or different at least, from the way India responded to Canada, in which there was not only harsh words exchanged, but a whole diplomatic row that broke out, and they expelled each other's diplomats. So yeah, the American indictment is quite a game changer.
Now, in November, before this latest indictment, you wrote an article for The Diplomat detailing how the murder of the Canadian national, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, fit into a broader pattern of targeted killings involving Indian enemies abroad. And most of these other killings took place in Pakistan. Do you see similarities between those cases and this new case, the alleged plot in New York?
One of the direct similarities is, of course, the use of irregular combatants or the cartels and the gangsters. That's the same that's been running through, whether it's in Canada or the many killings that have happened in Pakistan, and the current Nikhil Gupta indictment, because it's quite clear, as it said here, that Nikhil Gupta was a drug runner or a gun runner of some sorts, and he did it at the behest of some government, some intel officer based in India, who they've identified as CC1 in the indictment. However, there's a notable difference. If you look at para 2 of the indictment, you'll see that they have identified the Indian handler, CC1, as previously having served in India's Central Reserve Police Force, and he received XYZ training. Now, this is very curious. Let us say there is an operative who is a free agent of a gun runner. I find it very curious that he or she would know the antecedent of the handler who's talking to him. Now, it could be a Central Reserve Police Force, former CRPF person who's now works for some agency who's doing this. But this is not information that is ever given out as per operating protocol. So it's very curious as to how the Americans have delved this deep into this operation. That's point one. The other option sounds even more dangerous, that if they have received this information from the operative Nikhil Gupta, then how far is he from the Indian establishment? Will the Indian establishment be still able to say that, oh, he's not our guy, we don't know who he is? So that's a big difference. The second aspect of this is, in paragraph 3, the indictment says Gupta was recruited in or about May 2023. Gupta wasn't arrested until June. So unless we are to believe that they recovered his phone after his arrest and got all these details, this points to something even deeper. Did the Americans know already what was being plotted in New Delhi? Of course, the onus, what doesn't change between all these cases, whether it's Pakistan, Canada, or the American one, the onus of burden lies on the accuser. So it is to be seen as to how much, to what extent the Americans can substantiate these allegations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk a little more about the difficulty of proving state involvement, which I think we can safely say is a hallmark of extraterritorial assassination programs all around the world. And we'll talk more about this later, but India is far from alone in being accused of undertaking such operations. As you mentioned, the Canadian Prime Minister said he had credible evidence, which has never been elaborated on or provided, of Indian involvement. We see some more concrete accusations in this U.S. indictment, but obviously it's an indictment. We haven't actually seen the evidence yet, but it alleges that the Indian government, or an Indian government employee, hired essentially a drug and weapons trafficker, who then tried to outsource the murder onto yet another criminal. So the middleman was trying to hire a hitman. And at one point in the indictment, he specifically cautioned that he can't undertake this operation himself because it would make the connection too close between potentially the Indian government. How is it even possible under these circumstances to credibly prove that a state is behind one of these assassinations when you have so many criminal networks involved in the interim?
It really is difficult, closing in on impossible. So there's nothing exceptional, as you said, about states carrying out operations through hitmen or free agents, as they are called, civilians essentially who work for X government or Y government. However, the way I look at, sorry, I want to backtrack and I want to talk a little bit about how it's being done in India and Pakistan thus far. If you really look at the entire history of India and Pakistan fighting against each other, whether it was the bomb blasts of 1990, 2611, and the many other things which Pakistan accuses India of having done, you really do see that what is known as the underworld in these paths frequently. You have the criminal networks being an integral part of these operations. So what happens is that then a legal process goes and gets stuck to being just a criminal operation, a criminal investigation against certain individuals, and the state doesn't come in. And as I'm constantly saying, the onus of proof is very much on the Americans. And I dare say that it's becoming a habit of the West in geopolitics to constantly throw accusations and never really come up with enough evidence supporting it. We saw that in the pipeline blast carried out, which was blamed on Russia, but we never really saw the evidence for it. We didn't see it for Russiagate. We haven't seen it for so many things. So I think that's a critical line with which the Indian press, at least, or the Indian government might hit back, saying, show us the proof, like put it in black and white.
Mm-hmm. And of course, another aspect of this, and you noted this in your article as well, the US has its own global assassination program. Russia has been accused of attempting, and in some cases actually murdering enemies of the Russian state abroad. So you have this argument that everybody does, and that somehow that absolves India of blame for also undertaking these actions. How is this coloring India's reaction? How might it color the negotiations between India and the United States behind the scenes?
To answer the first part of your question about how this might color the response from India, so India officially, the Indian government continues to deny this. There hasn't been a change to this. But we do see a track 2 of communications that's building up, either through the press outlets which are closer to the government or in social media or whatever. There is ample talk about Indians pointing fingers back at the West, or at least telling them that you really are not in a position to lecture India about an assassination program. Then, of course, there's the political reality of things that the person who was targeted by Nikhil Gupta, though it's not been mentioned, it's a non-likelihood. The Sikh separatist leader Pannu. You will recall that in November, early November, Pannu did warn about blowing up an aircraft on the 19th of November. So he is an American citizen. He lives under American protection. So then the natural question that rises here, that comes up here, is that when the US continues to say that India is an ally, a very important ally, a counterbalance to China, and so on and so forth, and of course a big trade partner, why is the American soil playing host to someone who is live on TV and currently threatening Indian interests? So Indians do have a moral pushback possible. However, that leads us to a little more complicated part, is that the Indian response is kind of having its cake and eating it too. Either you deny that you have an assassination program, or you say that, oh, we did it because everybody does it and we have the right to defend our homeland. I see both these things coming forth. So yeah, that's a game of diplomacy, if you will, or public projection, which will take a course of its own. It might not last very long.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Sid. We are out of time for today, but of course, we'll continue to keep a close eye on this unfolding story at The Diplomat.